of knowledge for who Sister Souljah is and what she intended for the Coldest Winter Ever to be comes from her 1994 autobiography, No Disrespect. By the time it was published, she was married with a son. But before all that, she was born Lisa Williamson in the Bronx in 1964. She spent her college years in the 80s as a student of Rutgers University, traveling worldwide, being outspoken on campus on issues from apartheid in South Africa to American racial violence and the failures of the school system to properly educate black children. She was featured on Public Enemy songs and later became a full member. Her most popular and well-known song was The Hate That Hate Produced. She released her first and only album, 360 Degrees of Power, in 1992. This was the same year that Latasha Harlins was senselessly murdered and Rodney King was horrifically beaten, and in both instances, perpetrators went without consequences. These LA events were just triggers for long simmering racial tensions between the black community and Koreans and the black community and police. The city of LA would explode into riots and urban unrest that led to shootouts, over 63 deaths, and over 12,000 arrests. There was over $1 billion in property damage. Sister Souljah reached nationwide infamy when she said, "If black people kill black people every day, why not have a week and kill white people?" The remark, taken out of context about the LA riots and the total injustice of Rodney King, was then pounced on by Bill Clinton. He criticized her and her affiliation with Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalition, and the incident has become known as a Sister Souljah moment, in which a politician publicly denounces extremist views believed to be associated with their party.
The other thing that I said is that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
This incident brought more interest in Souljah's views and opinions, and 2 years later she published No Disrespect. The book documents Souljah's life through her relationships with various people, both romantic and platonic. She recounts her affair with a married man and her failed attempt at becoming the polygamous partner of a man named Derek, who is in a relationship. Derek's girlfriend asks, "Why are you filling my man's head up with this polygamy bullshit? Can't you get your own man?" Souljah reasoned that there are so few good black men that maybe she and other women should share. She wrote, "I told her that I believed we were all sharing our men anyway at one point or another. But since we were afraid to admit it to ourselves, we didn't deal with it honestly. I told her that I'd rather deal with it honestly. I added that racism had systematically made it impossible for black men to survive. But since most of us were too naive and too lazy to fight white supremacy while building our communities, we had better get used to the idea of sharing our men." The girlfriend replied, "Well, sweetheart, my man can do something else for the community besides fucking you." Pow. Sister Souljah obviously gave off a very pick-me mentality. Though a lot can be said about her book of memoirs, including the fierce homophobia that Sister Souljah spews and her extreme rejection of her mother dating a white man, plus her heteronormative belief that children must be raised specifically by a mother and a father to be well-adjusted, I want to focus on the chapter Nikki, which clearly became an inspiration for the Coldest Winter Ever. Nikki is described as a pretty and vivacious Rutgers undergraduate who Souljah does not respect because she has relationships with multiple men and takes gifts and money from them. She wrote, "One day I finally summoned the courage to ask Barry why an attractive, successful, married businessman would allow himself to be abused by a woman the way he was abused by Nikki. He told me he was addicted to sex. Nikki was the only black woman he knew who would have anal sex with him. With Nikki, he not only got the best sex ever, he got to have sex with her from every position and in every area imaginable," Souljah described. "It may sound strange, but even though I didn't respect her, I still loved her. She'd been a loyal friend to me and was very considerate." Despite not respecting Nikki, Souljah attempts to emulate Nikki's nonchalant attitude with men and fails miserably. When attempting to have casual sex with a man inspired by Nikki, Souljah changes her mind, hides out in the bathroom, and emerges to find out the man has had a seizure. When she calls 911 and the paramedics ask the man if he knows Souljah, he says no, which wounds her pride and further turns her off to the idea of casual sex. In between numerous graphic sex scenes detailing Souljah's trysts with a married man and others, a main theme in No Disrespect is an emphasis on black people upholding black love, the heteronormative kind, something Souljah believes is increasingly impossible because of interracial relationships, casual sex, homosexuality, racism in prisons, and people, especially women, like Nikki. When Nikki, a victim of rape at 12, explains why she uses sex to get the things she wants, instead of relying on love and monogamous relationships, relationships, she said, "Sex is good. It can be used for power, for escape, or for nothing at all." This liberated attitude about sex reflects many modern women's attitudes, for better or worse. For Souljah, this is clearly for the worse. It's an attitude she would tackle in the coldest winter ever. So, Sister Souljah herself said in 2011 that she rejects the black urban and street lit genre. She said, "I'm not in sync with this street lit genre. I think that when European authors or Euro-American authors write about urban, suburban, or rural areas, it's just called literature. So I call my work literature, and anyone who reads my books knows that it's literature." That may be what she believes, but her book was street lit to a T. Let's talk about the literary genre that the coldest winter ever propelled into the limelight. For starters, arguments over what is appropriate literature for black people to write and read is decades long. After Claude McKay published Home to Harlem in 1928, he was dragged by W.E.B. Du Bois for his gritty and unrelenting portrayal of Harlem nightlife. Du Bois wrote that the book for the most part nauseates me, and after the dirtier parts of its filth, I feel distinctly like taking a bath. The earliest books considered to be a part of the urban literature genre were by writers like detective novelist Chester Himes and Donald Goines. While serving time in a Michigan prison in the 60s, Goines attempted to pen westerns. However, after reading one of the OG urban literature classics, Goines changed his genre. The classic in question was Pimp, The Story of My Life by Robert Beck, aka Iceberg Slim. This gritty tale of a man's journey into becoming a pimp in the mid-20th century has become a staple for pimp and hip-hop culture. Goines would go on to write 16 urban novels before his death in 1974. Many of the plots in his stories were based on people and crimes that he knew of firsthand. The genre lulled for the following decades and was slightly revived with 1994's Fly Girl by Omar Tyree. I can't stand that book, but it was popular enough. It was the 1999 release of The Coldest Winter Ever, however, that signaled a hunger for real and even gritty stories by black authors. Literary agents didn't catch on for a while, but hustlers knew. Many popular writers of urban books got their start by selling self-published books on the streets. A 2008 New York Times article detailed how librarians noticed the desire for urban lit and went out and bought such books on the street so they could add them to library shelves. But before all those books were being written, there were innovators like Vicky Stringer, whose biography reads like a generic urban fiction novel. While attending The Ohio State University as a freshman in the late 80s, she fell in love with a local drug dealer at a sorority step show and began running with his crew instead of going to class. They lived lavishly, but after she got pregnant, the man abused her, denied the child, and left her. A continuing downward spiral led to survival sex work, pimping, and eventually more drugs. In 1994, she was arrested. While serving a 7-year federal prison sentence for drug trafficking in Texas, Stringer wrote a fictionalized autobiography. After her release from prison in 2001, she tried to sell her manuscript, but it was rejected by 26 publishers, so she decided to sell it herself. Vicky raised $2,500 from 25 friends and family, asking for $100 apiece, and sold over 1,000 copies of Let That Be the Reason within a week. Sales were so great that along with the $5,000 loan, she started Triple Crown Productions, a publishing company named after her old drug crew. The company quickly began publishing titles from various authors, including Quan, a former drug dealer also looking to get in on this legal industry. Vicky went on to publish his first book, Gangsta. Triple Crown Productions published over 100 titles in its heyday and saw millions of dollars in revenue. Other publication companies followed. For instance, Ashley and Jaquavis Coleman, a husband and wife team, wrote 5,000 words a day to churn out over 50 titles at their peak, and they're still writing right now. Along with this boom in urban literature publishing came two things. One, teachers and librarians saw a rise in literacy and pleasure reading among teens and adults who once rarely read anything at all. Secondly, there was a rise in criticism as people bumped heads over whether or not increased literacy was actually good if the books in question were full of sex, violence, and questionable morals. A 2006 opinion piece by Nick Childs in the New York Times titled "Their Eyes Were Reading Smut" summed up critics' complaints of urban literature. He wrote, "On shelf after shelf, in bookcase after bookcase, all that I could see was lurid book jackets displaying all forms of brown flesh, usually half naked and in some erotic pose, often accompanied by guns and other symbols of criminal life. I felt as if I was walking into a pornography shop. Except in this case, the smut is being produced by and for my people, and it is called literature." That same year, acclaimed novelist Terry McMillan wrote a scathing email to powerful members of the publishing world, accusing them of harming black consumers by publishing exploitative, destructive, racist, egregious, sexist, base, tacky, poorly written, unedited, degrading books.